أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, our dear brothers and sisters. I welcome with me tonight Dr. Hassan Lamy for another session on the Book of the World, Journeying with the Quran in 30 Nights. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Enlightened Thought. You can also follow us on Facebook, sydney.org.au. We welcome your thoughts and your comments as well as your questions with us as we proceed forward. Tonight's session will focus on two key virtues. The first is the virtue of moderation, which Brother Hassan will explore, and the second is the virtue of dialogue, which I will present. Without further ado, let us now move to the first recitation of the Holy Quran with Sheikh Mohammed Al-Dihnawi.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. ولئن أذقنا الإنسان منا رحمة ثم نزعناها منه إنه ليئوس كفور ولئن أذقناه نعماء بعد ضراء مسته ليقولن ذهب السيئات عني إنه لفرح فخور إلا الذين صبروا وعملوا الصالحات أولئك لهم مغفرة وأجر كبير.
Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. Thank you again for joining us tonight. Thank you, Brother Muhammad, and thank you, Brother Muhammad Sadiq, for his extensive work every night. It is tiring. So tonight we'll be covering the Juz' number 12, whereby we'll be focusing on Surah Hud. So before I start talking about the verses which were recited by our respected Sheikh Mohammed Dihnawi, I'll be talking about the scaffolding of this chapter in order to provide a context for us when we engage in exploration of the verses. So Surah Hud is one of the 6 surahs which start with Alif Lam Ra. And as Ayatollah Allama Tabatabai suggested in his tafsir, if we explore, investigate the verses, the chapters where they start with the same huruf al-muqatta'a, with the same letters, Alif Lam Ra or Alif Lam Mim, we will find some common themes and some related topics which will allow us to dig deeper and connect them together and understand them better. So Surah Hud is one of them. Surah Hud has lots of similarities with Surah Yunus. Surah Yunus, which is the chapter before Surah Hud, they have lots of commonalities. And the major topic discussed in both chapters, but we're going to focus on Surah Hud, is basically the fate and the destiny of previous nations in the history, whereby they either accepted or rejected the invitation given by the prophets. And as we said, the prophets come to enliven a society. لِمَا يُحْيِيكُمْ. They come to enliven the society through demolishing the structure which has led to inequality, to slavery, to injustice, to spread of vices, oppression. So these 2 surah, we're talking about Surah Hud more specifically, talks about how previous nations, they received this adhab, which is the adhab is a trend. It's not adhab, it's not like God is sitting at the back waiting for someone to do a mistake and then he will punish them. No, adab is in the form of when you don't uphold to your responsibilities at an individual level and at a societal level, you're bound to collapse, you're bound to fall. And you explained about this in the previous nights, that if a nation doesn't change what is supposed to change, they will go through this rise and fall of civilizations. This chapter is revealed in the 9th year of Ba'tha. That gives us lots of context. In the 9th year of Ba'tha, the Muslims were under intense and great amount of pressure from the mushrikeen of Mecca on the economical sanctions, political sanctions. There were exiles from the city, and for Prophet another calamity happened, and that was he lost 2 major supporters, Sayyidah Khadija sallallahu alayha, which we talked very briefly about his relationship with Khadija, and Abu Talib alayhi salam, his uncle. These 2 were great moral and financial and emotional supporter in his journey. And that's why Surah Hud comes in that context. In other words, it comes to give Prophet lesson of patience and also consoling his pain, decreasing that pain, give him a bit of tranquility about the promise of success that's coming. So this context provides us a better understanding when we go to the verses, especially the verses that Sheikh recited, verses 9 to 11, where in life, that is the nature of life. You face calamities, you rise, and then you're given another gift, and you fall, and that's how it is. So Surah Al-Hud, as Prophet said, شَيَّبَتْنِ Surah Hud, because of the verse فَاسْتَقِمْ كَمَا أُمِرْتَ وَمَنْ تَابَ مَعَكَ. And to cut the story short, because we want to get into the verse, to give Muslims the lesson of patience, the lesson that after every calamity there is basically ease and happiness, or with every calamity there is ease and happiness. Depends how you interpret the world, which is a different question. The prophets have been mentioned, 7 prophets, from Nuh, Hud, Salih, Lut, Ibrahim, Shu'aib, Yunus. And with each story, it's given how they came with their message and how they tried to have a dialogue with the people. Some believed, majority rejected, and this rejection came as well at a very despotic and non-democratic way, where the believers were not allowed to exercise their belief system. So in this chapter, if we look at the vocabularies being used, again, I said previously, this is one of the principles of understanding Quran, or a particular chapter. Look at the major vocabularies being used. And previously we said, even you can do it at an individual level. Look at your friends, look at your family members, see what vocabulary they use on an occasional basis. That gives a reflection of their personality. If they are humble, they're arrogant. If they are lovely, or they are more into the trait of animosity, so on and so forth. Ar-Rab is one of the major words used, which is, this chapter is not about the concept of creator. It's about the concept of Rab. Who is the Lord? Who is the one providing instruction for life? Who is the one giving the lifestyle? Prophets coming to different nations, coming with this lifestyle. We have prophets, 7 prophets. We have the word bayyina, indicating prophets did not come to force something upon someone. They came with bayyina. Bayyina is a proof which is very clear. Doesn't have this ghumul, doesn't have this complexity to it. The word rahmah 33 times, which is very high number, which means prophets did not come to cause inconvenience. They came with mercy. Rashid, the word Rashid has been used in Quran 3 times, and all the 3 times is in this verse, which means human intellectuality and emotionality and rationality requires a level of development at each stage of humanity. And you can see, for example, as we move from Nuh to Musa, there is that gradual intellectual growth and evolution in different communities. And you have dhulm, which is used 13 times, and one of the reasons for this dhulm, which happens in a society, is at-ta'abbud. They follow their leaders blindly. They do not ask questions, and they basically worship them like they are the lords. Now, so that was the scaffolding. So just briefly going to the verse that I will continue explaining in the second part of tonight's session. So verse number 9 of Surah Hud, وَلَئِنْ أَذَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنَّا رَحْمَةً. And when we allow this human being to taste. So Quran uses the word taste because taste, it means that you haven't fully absorbed it and swallowed it and eaten it. You just have a sip of it, a taste of it, meaning this life compared to the eternity is nothing. So you're just having a taste, and still you are this hasty and ungrateful creature. So when we allow this human, this creature, to taste a mercy from us, thumma, then, thumma is basically indicating a time difference. So there is a time elapsed before the next episode happening. thumma نزعناه منه. And then we took it off him, stripped that mercy off him. إنه ليئوس كريم. He is very disappointed and hopeless and ungrateful. وَلَئِنْ أَذَقْنَاهُ نَعْمَاءَ بَعْدَ الضَّرَّةِ. Now the other side of the story. When we allow him to taste blessings and gifts after a period of tribulation and hardship, مَسَّتْهُ لَيَقُولُنَّ ذَهَبَ السَّيِّئَةِ. They say all these calamities have gone. And interestingly, they say ذهب, which means you don't know who was the person, who was the being, who was the power allowed these calamities to go away, these tribulations, these hardships, these sufferings. So إِنَّهُ لَفَرِحٌ فَخُورٌ. And he is in an arrogant way very happy, in a way that he's showing off arrogantly that I was the one who brought this wealth, this happiness, and remove all these sicknesses, sufferings and tribulations from myself. And then Quran provides a pathway in which we may avoid these two extremities. In the second part I will talk about what I call, this verse is talking about the virtue of moderation, al-wasatiyya. I prefer the translation al-i'tidal, and I say later why al-i'tidal. Quran says إِلَّا الَّذِينَ صَبَرُوا, except those who exercise the virtue of patience. And previously we explained the virtue of patience, but one part we did not explain was the etymology of sabaru, which comes from the plant sobbar. I forgot the English name for it. I think you mentioned once.
Which grows in a dry climate.
A dry climate. Yeah. Sobbar is a plant which is bitter, as if you're in a state of chewing and biting this bitter plant, but it's still وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. In this state, they're not passive, they're active. And again, if you refer back to the night we talk about the virtue of patience, there we said patience is to wait strategically when to act when the time comes. أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ مَغْفِرَةٌ. And indeed, for these people is the maghfirah, the forgiveness from God. وَأَجْرٌ كَمِيرٌ. And there is a great reward that they will be granted and given. In the second part, inshallah, I'll cover the virtue of moderation in more details from a virtue ethics perspective and from a Quranic perspective.
Hassan, Dr. Hassan, thank you for your great insights. Let us now move to the following recitation of the Holy Quran by Sheikh Mohammed al-Dehnawi.
أحسن الله إليك.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولقد أرسلنا نوحا إلى قومه إني لكم نذير مبين ألا تعبدوا إلا الله إني أخاف عليكم عذاب يوم أليم. فقال الملأ الذين كفروا من قومه ما نراك إلا بشرا مثلنا وما نراك اتبعك إلا الذين هم أراذلنا بادي الرأي وما نرى لكم علينا من فضل بل نظنكم كاذبين. قال يا قوم أرأيتم إن كنت على بينة من ربي وآتاني رحمة من عنده فعميت عليكم أنلزمكموها وأنتم لها كارهون. ويا قوم لا أسألكم عليه مالا إن أجري إلا على الله وما أنا بطارد الذين آمنوا إنهم ملاقو ربهم ولكني أراكم قوما تجهلون. ويا قوم من ينصرني من الله إن طردتهم أفلا تذكرون. ولا أقول لكم عندي خزائن الله ولا أعلم الغيب ولا أقول إني ملك ولا أقول للذين تزدري أعينكم لن يؤتيهم الله خيرا الله أعلم بما في أنفسهم إني إذا لمن الظالمين. قالوا يا نوح قد جادلتنا فأكثرت جدالنا فأتنا بما تعدنا إن كنت من الصادقين. قال إنما يأتيكم به الله إن شاء وما أنتم بمعجزين. ولا ينفعكم نصحي إن أردت أن أنصح لكم إن كان الله يريد أن يغويكم هو ربكم وإليه ترجعون. أم يقولون افتراه قل إن افتريته فعلي إجرامي وأنا بريء مما تجرمون.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi, dear brothers and sisters. Welcome back. I'll finish off part one, inshallah, with my humble reflections on the virtue of dialogue. When we look into Juz' number 12 in the Holy Quran, as Brother Hassan beautifully mentioned earlier, we see the virtue of communication and dialogue in a beautiful light. Let me, before I explore the concept of dialogue and the practice of dialogue in this juz', I would like to introduce dialogue by showing what dialogue is not. إنما تعرف الأشياء بأضدادها. We know things by understanding their opposites. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us a lesson And we had already covered the story of Habil and Qabil when we spoke about the sanctity of life. Let me introduce to you what dialogue is not. There's a beautiful opening insight by the well-known Arab editor Ahmed Zaki in Al-Arabi magazine in Kuwait. He was a distinguished literary figure in the world of magazines and cultural writings. He was also a lecturer in physics. Ahmed Zaki once introduced Al-Arabi in one of its editions with a beautiful dialogue that defies dialogue. A dialogue that ends up defeating dialogue. He says, التقى زيد وعمر فتصافحا. Zayd and Amr met each other and they exchanged handshakes. وجلسا في مقهى يتحاوران. And they sat together in a cafe to have a dialogue. فغلب زيد عمرا في الحوار. So Zayd defeated Amr in dialogue. And by the way, the word defeat here does not imply any confrontation or defeat as we see in debating. But غلب here means he was able to persuade. فقام عمرو فصفع زيدا. And so Amr reacted by standing up and slapping Zayd. Ahmed Zaki comments on this and he says, إنه منطق القوة يبدأ عندما ينتهي منطق الحوار. This is the logic of power. It begins when the logic of dialogue ends.
You reminded me of the verses you covered in Surah Al-Baqarah, which was the discussion between Ibrahim alayhi salam and the king Namrud. That they had exchanged two arguments. When he was defeated in a sense that you talked about, he said, now we cannot deal with you anymore. It's the language of power.
Absolutely, very relevant in the context of dialogue and power, which is an interesting comparison and contrast, definitely. So this contrast between the two enables us to revisit what Sigmund Freud once said as he discussed and dissected civilization and its discontents. He once said, civilization began the first time an angry person threw a word instead of a rock. Isn't this an example of dialogue as the mean through which we counter violence in society? But dialogue is not simply about talking. It's not simply about exchanging words. Dialogue comes from the Greek dialogos. Logos means word or meaning. Dia means through. So dialogue in its etymological Greek roots gives us the meaning of a stream of meaning flowing among, through and between us. And I am reminded of the book of John in the New Testament, which says, in the beginning was the word, Logos. Doesn't this remind you of Surah Ar-Rahman? Ar-Rahman, خلق الإنسان, علمه البيان. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala distinguished the human phenomenon from the rest of the species of his creation by virtue of bayan, by virtue of clear and eloquent speech, which is the tool of dialogue.
And bayina is also multiple times mentioned in this verse, this chapter.
Ahsan. So bayina, which is a clear proof, does not mean only proof in the logical sense of the word. It also means proof in the dialogical sense of the word, that we come to this clear understanding together and no one can claim ownership to revealing the truth, because the truth could not have been revealed if there was no dialogue in the first place.
Indeed.
Which goes to show you that we partake even when we feel persuaded, and when we come to acknowledge that we are persuaded by the other. If it wasn't for our presence in the first place, this would not have been possible. So in the New Testament it says, in the beginning was the Word. Now, my dear brothers and sisters, we understand that Logos is not only limited to a meaning that streams through us. Logos in the ancient traditions also meant together, things together. So as if dialogue builds a relationship and reminds us that our mission is to assemble the scattered and shattered and fragmented pieces of life. When we engage in dialogue, we are actually helping each other in building a new palace from scratch. But this palace is not built by one person. Each individual, just like in Al-Madinah al-Munawwara, when the companions of the Prophet partook in building the Mosque of Medina, each and every one of them was carrying a rock and a stone. Each and every one of them was part of this reconstruction of the ideal of the Ummah, which we spoke about, which went beyond ethnicity, beyond culture, even beyond language, to embrace the common values of humanity, such as love and compassion and teamwork. So if this is the meaning of dialogue, then we can say in the beginning was the relationship. And dialogue is this mechanism that allows us to repair the broken relationship, to repair what we have destroyed and damaged, to look for the missing pieces, and not to say we can build and reconstruct by what we already have. My dear brothers and sisters, when we look into, as Brother Hassan mentioned, Surah Hud, and I'll add Surah Yusuf, because the beginning of Surah Yusuf,
Which is the next chapter.
It's where the Juz' 12 finishes. We see 8 characters engaging in 8 forms of dialogue. Number 1, Nuh alayhi salam and his people. Number 2, Hud and Ad, his people. Number 3, Salih with his people, Thamud. Number 4, Ibrahim alayhi salam and the angels that visited him. Number 5, Lut alayhi salam and his people. Number 6, Shu'aib and Madian. Number 7, Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun. And number 8, Yusuf alayhi salam and the drama of his life, especially towards the beginning of the surah. How do we know that the Quran is a book of dialogue? I mentioned this before in other presentations and events, but let me briefly elaborate on this in hope that you can also partake in the process of research to further explore the notion of dialogue. How do you see the concept and practice of dialogue manifested in the Quran? This is a question I pose to our audience. How do you see the practice of dialogue manifested in the Quran? In order to track and trace the notion of dialogue in the Quran, we need to look at the index of dialogue, the sign of dialogue, which is related to language. And in the Arabic language, it's al-qawl. The Arabs nicely derived from a masdar they called fanqala. Al-fanqala, فَإِن قُلْتَ قُلْتُ. فَإِن قُلْتَ قُلْتُ. If you say, I will say. You make an argument, I'll make a counter argument. This fanqala, we derived from it all the derivatives of al-qawl, such as qala, he said or he said in the masculine, qalat, she said in the feminine, yaquluna, they say in the plural, qalu, which was mentioned 331 times. Every time we see قالوا in the Quran, they said, 99% it is referring to the other camp that stood against the ideology of Tawheed, which goes to show you the profound presence of the other in the Quran. And I'll get to this point in the second participation. قل, which is the indication and the index to the camp of Tawheed, because قل is by the divine revelation to the Prophet. Say to them. It was mentioned 332 times, almost 50-50. 50% the other speaks in the Quran, 50% the Tawheed camp speaks in the Quran. This is democracy without a theory. Democracy without even debating it or discussing it. We have قولوا, say in the plural. قيل, قول, قولهم. I won't go through all the meanings so that we save time. These are examples of how the derivatives of qawl are multiple in the map of the Quran, in the pedigree of the Quran, in that tree, the linguistical tree of the Quran. We see 11 dialogical contexts in the Quran. Number 1, the speaker. Number 2, the addressed subject. Number 3, the listener. Number 4, the interlocutor. Number 5, the interrupter. Number 6, the absentee. Number 7, the present subject. Number 8, the masculine. Number 9, the feminine. Number 10, the dual. And 11, the plural. These are just snapshots of how the Quran not only advocates dialogue, but embodies the entirety of dialogue by acknowledging the different levels of dialogue and the different stations of dialogue. I will finish off with a note about the meaning of dialogue as we introduced it. As I tried to reflect on the etymological and the contextual meaning of dialogue, I noticed, subhanallah, at the beginning of Surah Yusuf alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides us with a clue that helps us guess why dialogue is significant. At the beginning of Surah Yusuf, we see the word ahsana, ahsan al-qasas, the best of stories. But towards the end of Surah Yusuf alayhi salam, we see the word ibra. What is the relationship between ahsan, ibra, and hiwar? Let alone qissa. We know that a story cannot but contain a dialogue. If you wish, the blood of a story is an element of dialogue, which recognizes and allows characters to voice their experiences, their concerns, their wishes, their beliefs, their aspirations, their love, their hate, whatever you wish to call it. Ahsan at the beginning, ibra at the end. What is the relationship between the two? I say dialogue. Because to move from ahsan, the most beautiful, the best of stories, to the lessons of these stories, you need to have the tool of dialogue that allows you to cross from one to another. And that is why Al-Razi, in his tafsir, he looks at the word i'tibar, the pedagogy of learning, to learn a lesson from a story. He traces it back to the root, the ayn, the ba and the ra. And he says, عبرة هي العبور من الطرف المجهول إلى الطرف المعلوم. So it is crossing from the unknown side to the known side. Meaning you have to begin in a state of knowledge, in a state of ignorance. You have to have this sense of humility by engaging with the other in order to reach al-ma'loom, the knowledge and the understanding.
Which means you don't come with a fixed position that is unchangeable even there is a revelation coming down. You go to the table of dialogue with an open mind. Well, I have my convictions, but I want to come and engage in that discussion with you.
Ahsant. And that's the I think the gist of the message by Al-Razi. Now, what do we gain from this, my dear brothers and sisters? We gain that one, through dialogue, crosses from one mental, emotional, intellectual state to another by deriving meaning and understanding. Doesn't this remind you of Nuh alayhi salam and the other prophets when they said, Ya qawmi, my people? They are addressing their people with dialogue which rules out hate. As Nietzsche once said, it is enough for you to look at me as an enemy, not to understand what I say. Nuh alayhi salam and other prophets are teaching us through Ya qawmi, my people, I will love you, and because I love you, despite our different belief systems, I will maintain that sense of dialogue with you, which allows us to come to a common understanding. I will pause here, and inshallah after the break we will continue. Let us go for a 5-minute break. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
The same when I'm too concerned by what they say. Why should I, when I have you, to doubt you would be the worst mistake. Deep inside I know, amidst all the darkness and everything which makes no sense, I know that you exist. Guides me through my darkest nights, shows me right from wrong at night, the world that often lies. Cause I don't need anyone or anything in life but you. No, I don't need anyone to show me my way. No, I don't need anyone but you. Trials of life upon me are more precious than diamonds and gold. Tested with fire, I may be, but I know I'll come out stronger in this world. And deep inside I know that amidst all the darkness and everything which makes no sense, I know that you exist. Guides me in my darkest nights, shows me right from wrong in life, the world that often lies. Cause I don't need anyone or anything in life but you. No, I don't need anyone to show me my way. No, I don't need anyone but you. I only want the things you know is best for me. I gladly sacrifice if that's what you decree. I would break out on in eternity, perish into the sea. That's what you want from me. Cause I don't need anyone, I don't need no anything in life but you.
Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers and sisters. Thank you, Mohammed, for the insightful comments and how basically we have this world religion discussion. We're talking about the book of the world, but in which we also want to know the book of other religions, which we believe in the continuity of the message of Islam from Adam to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam wa ala kulli al-anbiya. So going back to verses 9 to 11, in which we opened our discussion tonight. So I provided the translation. Now let's go deeper into the concept that I think this verse is trying to tell us, or the verses. I think these verses are telling us about the virtue of moderation. Let's call it virtue. At the end I will change from virtue to another descriptor. This verse is giving us a very important principle in life, which allows us to deal with different issues in our life in an appropriate manner. So let's get into the discussion. I will be providing some points as we go along, using multiple references. Aristotle books on ethics, Plato's book Republic, and the recent book Faces of Moderation, The Art of Balance in an Age of Extremes. And also at the end of this discussion I'll be referring to the Quranic worldview and some of the sayings of the Prophet and Imam Ali alayhi salam. So point number one, this verse is telling us avoid having a myopic vision when you face a situation. Whether this situation is positive, meaning a happy occurrence, or it's negative, meaning it is a painful, inconvenient, and causing you suffering. Regardless, don't have this myopic vision in which you just see the moment and nothing else. Rather, you need to analyze it using the past and the future in order to move from this moment onwards. This virtue is the virtue of moderation, which allows us to escape this myopic vision in this context. In Arabic, we may call this virtue, which is basically mentioned using multiple terms. I will come at the end and say it, but let's say for the time being, al-wasatiyya, al-i'tidal, al-iqtisad, virtue of moderation. The next point, what is moderation? Simple definition, it is the process of eliminating or lessening extremes, deficiency and excess. So you want to eliminate these two extremes. In the words of Aristotle, it is called the golden mean. I will come back in point number 10 and explain it a bit further. In Japan, to teach the kids in the educational system this important virtue, they have a cup hanging by two strings. This cup, when it's empty, is inclining forward. When it's full, it's inclining backward. But when it's half full, it is standing upright. Which reminds me of a poem by the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu. He says, better stop short than fill to the brim. Over sharpen the blade, and the edge will soon blunt. Amass store of gold and jade, and no one can protect it. Claim wealth and titles, and disaster will follow. Retire when the work is done. This is the way of heaven. In other words, Lao Tzu wants to tell us the way to heaven, the way of happiness, the way of enjoying our life here in order to build the life in eternity is through the concept of moderation, through the concept of retire when the work is done, through avoidance of perfectionism, through understanding of your weaknesses, through understanding there is only one perfect being in this world, and that's God. Next point is that we should focus, our focus should be on the good path rather than purely on the results, because results can disappoint us. At the same time, results can give us false hopes. But if my concern is about the good path, the golden path, the moderate path, I know that I'm doing the right things. But sometimes in life, like many prophets which are mentioned in this verse, they didn't get results. They were never given that position. In contrary, they were killed, they were exiles, they were oppressed. Here, to understand this notion of moderation, we need to understand two things. One is the concept of willpower. Willpower is the power to make decisions, which is dependent on four things. If you understand these four things, you can have the power to exercise your will, because moderation requires you to exercise this will. Number one is the values. Number two, the emotions. Number three, the faculty of reason or rationality. And number four, the talents. Now, your willpower can be infected and inflicted and affected negatively if the values become dogmatic. For example, you become tribalism. For example, you become a conformist. So the values don't serve the willpower to exercise it in a way to enjoy the virtue of moderation. So if you value honesty, then you try to exercise this willpower in enjoying your virtue of moderation. The second point is emotion. Emotion, I think the major emotion that every human being is seeking for in its positive sense is pleasure. Everything we do in our life, from the moment that we wake up in the morning, is to seek this pleasure. Now, when this pleasure, in the word of Greek philosophers, become short-sighted pleasure, or what they call short-sighted hedonism, meaning you just think about instantaneous, momentarily pleasure. It is not a long-term, futuristic, goal-oriented pleasure. For example, I want to watch Netflix 24/7. Obviously, you're not going to be able to finish anything. So emotions, if it's not in a long-sighted hedonism, meaning long-sighted seeking pleasure, it will not serve your willpower. And then reason, if reason is devoid and divorced from emotions, it will lead to a very dry and rigid lifestyle. And that is the problem with instrumental rationality, where everything is a tool for your achievements. Again, your willpower will be inflicted. As a result, you will lose the virtue of moderation if rationality is divorced from emotions. And lastly is the issue of talents. If you're not aware of your talents, you will lose sight of your willpower, and as a result you lose sight of your moderation. Now, willpower requires something beforehand. They go sequentially, and that is the notion of taqwa, self-control. Self-control leads to a proper willpower in which you are using your values, your emotions, your rationality, your talents in order to achieve the virtue of moderation. As Plato says, moderation is a harmony between reason, spirit, and desire. So this gets me to the next point, whereby Aristotle describes moderation not anymore as a virtue. That's where I want to change the definition. Rather, moderation is the silken string running through the pearl chain of all virtues. So for all the virtues to be like a beautiful necklace sitting together on that on the neck, it requires a silken string, and that silken string which connects all these pearls is moderation. What is moderation now? If now we change the definition, moderation is the golden mean. Moderation basically is between two extremes, then which is excess and deficiency. You become a master of any art which avoids excess and deficiency. You're always seeking the intermediate that preserves order and freedom in society. Yet, since the mean is never one-dimensional, we think moderation is one-dimensional. In the modern context, moderation is seen as not being adventurous, meaning you're boring, you're not trying new things, but rather moderation is not one-dimensional. We must always assess and evaluate the context of our choices in order to decide on the appropriate course of action. This is important. On the right time, in the right place, to the right extent, with regard to the right people. So now I get to the final point of my talk on moderation. So we change from moderation as a virtue to moderation as the connecting factor between all the virtues in order to avoid excess and deficiency. From a Quranic perspective, Quran says, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. There are multiple interpretations. One of them is this concept of moderation, because it provides you with peace, tranquility, and calmness of mind. I think this issue of moderation is best explained by Imam Ali alayhi salam. In Islam, moderation in isolation is not desired. If you are living in a tyrannical state where oppression is spread everywhere, where there is inequality, if you don't speak up, this is not moderation, because the context is different. That's why I prefer the word from wasatiyya, which is another word. In hadith we have al-iqtisad, in Quran also we have hanif, bayna dhalik, sawa, qasd, wasat. I prefer the word i'tidal. I'tidal comes from adl. In the words of Imam Ali alayhi salam, moderation, wasatiyya, i'tidal is not divorced from al-adl, justice. Moderation should be exercised with justice, and that is when this happy life can be achieved. That's where all the virtues can be connected. So al-i'tidal, coming from adl, tells us moderation is something which is just, and advocating justice. In other words, I provide multiple ways to exercise moderation. Number one, is this moderation alongside truth, or it is oriented towards falsehood? Because I can exercise moderation towards falsehood. So it's about the notion of justice. Number two, look at your role models, how they exercise moderation in their life. Number 3, do your homework. They call this in philosophy of virtues instrumental experimentation. Sometimes you have to go for experimentation purpose to excess in order to realize this was too excess. I need to go back to the point of moderation. This is called instrumental experimentation. Obviously, if you have role models who've gone that path, it would be very unwise to experiment it. And the last point that I want to say is consider your context. As I said, you want to do your action in the right time, in the right place, to the right extent, to the right people. And that is the virtue of moderation. Please define for us, in your own words, what is the virtue of moderation? To you, Akh Muhammad.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan Lamy, as always, for your invaluable reflections and thoughts. I think the notion of moderation is misunderstood due to the excessive, I think, talk in the media about it, especially in the context of liberal Islam, what's known as liberal Islam in the West, without much, I think, depth into understanding its relationship from a philosophical and ethical perspective with the notion of adl and justice. So you've really moved us beyond the media talk into a very thoughtful discussion that helps us reconstruct the relationship between adl and i'tidal. So thank you very much. I'll finish off in 8 minutes, inshallah, my final part, because we ran out of time. So as I was alluding to at the beginning of my first participation, the notion of dialogue in the Quran, interestingly enough, is not a noun concept. You would not find in the Quran al-hiwar, but you would rather find the actions of hiwar, which are tahawar, the exercise of dialogue, namely dialogic exchange. So when the Quran presents to us its theory of dialogue, it actually goes beyond theory into practice and reality. And that's why one of the benefits of dialogue, even in today's world literature, is that it shows what is happening instead of telling it. It actually shows us the drama as if we have entered an academy of dialogue and we are sitting to learn dialogue by witnessing it and not by reading about it or philosophizing about it. Having said that, philosophizing about dialogue is still an important cultural habit, because that's what makes us, again, unique human beings, that we are able to talk about what we practice. We are able to make sense of what we practice. We are able to develop what we practice and what we've accumulated across history. Another benefit of dialogue is that it shows us character and characters, in the sense that it presents to us the different types of characters in the human drama. Only through dialogue are we able to understand and appreciate the temperament of different people. Are we able to appreciate and understand the different traits of different personalities? So again, dialogue, he teaches us to be patient with the other and not to expect the other to conform, but rather walk with the other.
It seems like through dialogue you have to exercise all the virtues, such as patience, such as honesty, such as justice, such as moderation that we talked about,
such as active listening,
gentleness, softness.
As if dialogue is the medium, but as sociologists say, the medium is the message. It is the message, and more than that, I think the medium is the massage, which helps us to relieve all the or the tension in the ideological and intellectual muscles of our human body. This is the beauty of dialogue. It is a medium, it is a message, and it is a massage. Let me also introduce a third benefit of dialogue, which is it allows us to be direct witnesses of what is happening and not be absent, but rather active participants in bearing witness to what is happening in that particular drama, and hence become more responsible to learn from these encounters in our everyday lives. My dear brothers and sisters, in the literature we have different types of talks when it comes to dialogue and conversations. I'll just mention 3, and then I'll finish off with how the Quran, through the context of Surah Hud and Surah Yusuf alayhi salam, exercises dialogue with the other at the level of justice 3 times as practical strategies for our own learning and understanding. In the literature we have exploratory talk, we have cumulative talk, we have disputational talk. Obviously these are only 3 common types of talks. There are many other talks, but I'll just focus on these 3. The first is exploratory talk, which what I think is dialogue in essence. I will not define this term, I'll just give practical examples of what this means. When you engage, for example, in shared senses of pause in a dialogue, this indicates of you or the other being at ease and peace with uncertainty. Often when we pause and remain silent, we are actually expressing that sense of peace with the uncertainty, with not being able to reach an answer or even an understanding. The Quran is teaching us that dialogue allows us to develop this virtue of pausing. And I think this is something that goes counter to the very culture of our fast talk media types today, who do not pause, who just keep on reproducing words after words, and if they stop, they feel ashamed that they're not competent enough to keep the flow, due to the fact that time is money, unfortunately, which is another issue that we are facing today. So first practical component of exploratory talk is the virtue of pause, which shows that you are now at ease with uncertainty. Second, asking for help without embarrassment. Students are very good at this. They can exercise dialogue sometimes better than adults running society. They ask for help without feeling embarrassed because they understand that they are human beings and they don't have the answers to all the questions. And thirdly, being able to take up the unfinished talk or utterances of others and finishing them without anyone seeming concerned about issues of ownership. Let's say Brother Hassan shares an idea, but he does not complete the sentence. I come in to complete it for him. Me doing so by virtue of this dialogic exchange does not mean that I own this idea. And the same applies to Brother Hassan when he is exercising the same practice in our conversation and in our dialogue. Cumulative talk, which is the second type, is about identifying with the group identity. So they often call this a monologic we. So basically the group identity should not be disputed or challenged. And we often see examples of this in our own sectarian spheres, when we try to engage in dialogue but in order to protect our collective ego and not to widen our horizons. And finally, disputational talk. Disputational talk is all about identifying with your ego in order to be right all the time. And that's something we see more at an interpersonal level.
My way or the highway.
Ahsant, my way or the highway, absolutely. So I want you to think about exploratory talk, because this type of talk which teaches us dialogue, I think is something we rarely find in today's hyperactive society. So share your experience about exploratory talk and what it means, and how do you think it shows in our genuine and thoughtful
And
discussions.
what are the characteristics of a proper, genuine dialogue?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll finish off inshallah with how the Quran exercises, we ran out of time, dialogue with the other at the level of justice 3 times. Maybe I should limit it to one example,
And then complete it tomorrow.
and we can complete it tomorrow inshallah. The Quran recognizes the perspective of the other despite its absurdity. You know, my dear brothers and sisters, Dr. Hassan, the most terrible existential experience any human being can have in life is to be absent and not to exist. And what I mean by to be absent, not to be recognized. The Quran is teaching us that dialogue is a treatment to this existential worry that each and every human community has in the world. In other words, when the Quran recognizes the perspective of the other, it is actually bringing the other from the shadows of suffering into the light of recognition and appreciation.
Ahsant.
Isn't this an example of how dialogue teaches us the very virtues that we advocate without talking about it,
Indeed.
without preaching it? And finally, I'll finish off with an African proverb that I would not get bored of repeating, never. Because for me, this African proverb is more than a statement.
The principle of life.
It's a principle in life. And if you think about it, it is like a stream of water that continuously flows, which reminds us of the etymological meaning of dialogue, which is a stream of meaning through, among, and between us. Listen to this African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, this is our fast-paced society, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
السلام عليكم. أحسنتم أستاذ محمد. بارك. we need all this.